Kate here. As I'm sure you can tell by my mess of a hair and my lack of makeup, I wasn't really planning on filming today. But, okay, this is probably the only time I'm going to mention the current state of the world on my channel. I'm going to try to keep stuff... I always think of my content as sort of escapism in a certain way. So I'm going to try not to let the current state of the world really have a big impact on my content. I'm going to keep making the content that I have been making previously. I don't see why not. I'm currently in more or less self-isolation. I'm not leaving the house at all. I am still in contact with like the household members, but I am not leaving. As some of you may know, I have a lot of health issues, so I am in the high risk category. So I'm staying inside for the foreseeable future. And as somebody who does have a lot of chronic health issues, I'm really good at staying inside. So I put together a list of things to read, watch, listen to help keep you from going stir crazy. And I think escapism is important at a time like this, and I think studying history is a really interesting way of doing so in an intelligent manner. Learning is always fun, and learning really keeps your mind active, and it keeps it engaged, and is an excellent cure to boredom. And a lot of things on this list may inspire you towards other activities you can do inside the home, like knitting and sewing and cooking and that sort of thing. So anyways, if you guys really like this video and like this list, I have tons more resources that I haven't listed in this video, so I can put together another list in the future if you guys are finding this helpful. I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm personally fine. I'm so used to staying inside. It's really not that different. It's kind of sad, actually, how little of an impact this has had. So I hope everybody else is doing okay. I know not everybody's handling it quite as well, so good luck. Now, if you're really into historical beauty, this is a book I use all the time in my videos. This is Health and Beauty Hints. This is from 1910, I believe. Yeah, 1910. And it's got articles on all kinds of stuff. Hair care, it's got skin care, complexion care. Some of it's just general tips. There are recipes in here as well. So you might recognize a few of these articles. I've definitely used some of these articles in videos in the past, and I probably will in the future. But if you're just looking for some more beauty content than YouTube can provide, this is an excellent resource. It's got some really fun pictures in this one too. Another beauty book on the list would be My Lady's Dressing Room. This one I believe is Victorian. Yeah, it's 1892. Okay, so this one has articles about just general beauty, you know, skincare and that sort of thing, as well as there are some recipes. A lot of them are kind of hidden in the text. They're not separate, so you really have to search for them. I believe I've done a few recipes and things from here as well. This one's a nice, light, easy, fun kind of read. Okay, this next one I highly, highly recommend. This is Every Woman's Encyclopedia. There are several editions of this available. This is, what did I pick? This is just volume 1, this one here, but there are a whole bunch of them. As you can see, they have a really high page count. There's a lot of information in these books. And they're from circa 1910 to 1912, but these are one of my favorite publications. These are so fascinating. They have all kinds of things about all kinds of different subjects. See here we have some of the home stuff, furnishings, house plans, decor. And if we go down further, see we have beauty articles. Some of it's history focused. It's one of the more intellectual publications. There is a lot of sort of, you know, house care and that sort of thing, but it definitely does have an intellectual slant to it, which I find quite interesting. There's a lot of sort of science of the time, as well as sort of historical, historical information as it was told back then. Not like modern historical, but you know what I mean. It really does focus a lot on women's education, There's stuff on how to earn income as a woman. You can see we got some medical information here, first aid. So it really is quite an eclectic and diverse mix of stuff. Here again we have fashion again. So they're huge publications. There's quite a few of them. I would highly, highly recommend checking these ones out if you're looking for something to read and possibly crafts to do in the future. You can see here we have some crafting materials, some tips on embroidering collars and that sort of stuff. So if you're looking for inspiration for maybe a craft or a recipe or something to try, these are great, as well as just a really, really fascinating read. Another fun thing to check out are old catalogs. I pulled up Eaton's here. I think there's some Sears available as well. I picked Eaton's because I'm Canadian, so Eaton's, yay! A really fun activity I do all the time is going fantasy shopping, whereas, you might set yourself a budget or something, or just generally, oh, I'm looking for a spring wardrobe, and you go through the pages, and you imagine if you were back then, what would you buy? Which hat would you pick? So this one's from 1917. They do have other decades as well. But we have all kinds of absolutely stunning fashion advice. I like the fashion in here because it's sort of an every woman's, like an everyday look. The women in here, this is practical. This is not like a high fashion kind of situation. So you really get a better idea of what women actually wore. And they often have, hats and accessories and things that you can use for inspiration for your own looks. So if we scroll down a bit further, there's also all kinds of products. So not just fashion. I also like looking at, okay, well, what beauty products and household products were available. You can see here all the different types of combs and brushes and soap and cameras and all kinds of just random stuff. They have not only furniture but home furnishings as well. I use it to date furniture too. If I'm looking at antiques, I often use these to get an idea of what was available. As I said, this one's 1917. If we scroll down here, we have all kinds of different eras. There's 1913, 1907. This one doesn't have a date, but that one looks quite old. That one might be Victorian. And there's a 1920s one right there. I would recommend going down to the similar item thing at the bottom. Often you're going to find all kinds of other books, and one book will lead you to another book, and then another, and then you can spend hours without any trouble. Another thing archive.org has a lot of is old magazines. So here we have a McCall's magazine. I think this one's 1911. You're going to find them from a range of dates if 1911 isn't your era. And these make a really fun read through. We have short stories, we have articles about various subjects, we have fashion information. That is a fun dollhouse. But here's one from the 30s, so 1930s. As I said, there's quite a range available. I'm going to link below the specific issues that I'm showing in this video, but as I said, you can search for other videos, or if we scroll down, under similar items, you're going to have a whole bunch more recommendations. So if you, whoa, that one's quite a racy one right there. So if you find one that you like and you finished it, scroll down to the bottom, see what else is available. You're likely to get a whole bunch more recommendations for new things to read. And as I said, one thing leads to another. You can also click on some of the topics. For example, Ladies' Home Journal. If I wanted more issues of Ladies' Home Journal, you can click that, and it'll link you to everything else that lists that as, I think it was subject I clicked. So you're going to get some more here. But I would recommend just randomly clicking stuff and see where it leads you. Other type of magazines that you could look at would be home magazines. This is Modern Home Magazine. I think this is the 1920s edition, 1924. So these have all kinds of home decor and furniture advice, furniture placement, and that kind of stuff. These are really fun to flip through and maybe get an idea of how to rearrange your space to make it look more vintagey, or just decor ideas, decor inspiration. House plans, those are kind of fun. I always like a good old house plan. If you're looking for more of an audio entertainment rather than reading, there are all kinds of old radio shows on archive.org. Now, how legal it is that these are uploaded, I'm not entirely sure, because I'm pretty sure they do not count as public domain, but they're there. Some of the ones I really recommend, I just finished listening to all the Barrie Craig episodes. I was quite impressed with those ones. I liked them more than I thought I would. All-time favorite, Philip Marlowe. Philip Marlowe is probably one of the best radio shows. You're going to notice that I like a lot of the detective radio shows, the private eye ones. There are other radio shows. There's things like the Bob Hope Show, if you prefer more of a musical comedy mix. It's kind of hokey, but you're going to find romances and adventures and dramas and stuff too. But I'm a big fan of the detective shows. So we got Philip Marlowe, the Barrie Craig ones that I mentioned that I just finished listening to that were pretty good. Another all-time favorite would be Candy Matson, if you want a female lead, which is quite unusual in some of these old detective shows. Candy Matson is a really, really good one. I think there needs to be a modern adaptation of Candy Matson. It would make such a great TV show or movie or something, and you really wouldn't have to change that much. It hasn't really dated as much as perhaps some of the other old detective shows and characters and stuff. Another one that I'd highly recommend, and I'm actually quite surprised that I liked this one as much as I did, was The Haunting Hour. So this is sort of an anthology series. They're all individual stories. There's no sort of character crossover, but they all have sort of a spooky or supernatural theme to them. But most take a fairly realistic view. It's, like Scooby-Doo, the mask comes off at the end. It's not like Scooby-Doo. It's a lot more serious, but I was quite impressed with a lot of these episodes. So that's a fun one if you're looking for something a little spooky to listen to at night. Now, if you're not sure if you want an old radio show or something to read, can I recommend a cross of the two? This is Housekeeper's Chat. These are basically scripts that were used for a 1930s and 40s, most of them, radio show that was put on by the U.S. Agricultural Department. Aunt Sammy was supposed to be the host, but apparently in different regions it was read by different Aunt Sammys. So there wasn't a Aunt Sammy, it was very regionally dependent. But these old scripts are really fascinating. See, as I scroll through here, you can see some of the titles: Making Over Your Old Straw Hat, How to Dry Corn. They're definitely a sort of a country focus, like people living in the country. But some of these are really interesting. So if we go to, I'll just click Making Over an Old Felt Hat here. What they look like is this. So it's basically a radio transcript. And they're usually 2 or 3 pages. They're not very long, but they are so interesting. It's especially if you do have sort of an interest in the more rural history rather than just sort of city and Hollywood stars and stuff. I'm quite into sort of country lifestyle, so I find these really interesting. So they're a very fun read, and there's all kinds of topics. There's so many of these available. I don't know how many this search turned up like 5,000, over 5,000 of them. So I don't know if those are all these, but yeah, we got things on sewing, custard pie problems, soap making at home, homemade clothes without the homemade look. Oh, that's interesting. Homemade clothes without the homemade look. I might have to read that one later. If you're looking for something to watch rather than to read, there are also a whole bunch of old TV shows. Most of these are dating from the 1950s and the 1960s. I highly recommend the Michael Shayne series. I watched most of the ones that are available. They're from about the 1960s. Again, detective show. I like detective shows. But this one was a particularly good one. I really enjoyed that. Also in the detective TV show category would be Follow That Man. These are starring Ralph Bellamy. I believe these were filmed live, and it's kind of interesting watching, a detective show that was all live filmed. Sometimes the actors flub their lines, which is kind of funny, but I don't know if it gives a date on these. I think these are from the 50s. No, it doesn't give a date. Oh, there we go, 1953, somebody marked. So, again, the quality varies, but I find them quite fun to watch. These are all half an hour to an hour, depending on the show. Also, in something to watch would be old movies. I don't know how, I'm not going to mention any specific movies because there are just too many to mention, basically. Here we're going through some of the Buster Keaton movies. A lot of the Buster Keaton movies from the early 20s are public domain. Highly, highly recommend One Week is a particular favorite of mine, but they're all really great. So if you've never watched Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd would be another great comedy. I think right at the moment, I think a lot of us kind of need some lighthearted comedy. And Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Mabel Normand, Fatty Arbuckle, all are great silent film actors and actresses that have films available in the public domain. That you can watch for free. We also have Mary Pickford, if you're in the mood for something slightly more serious but still fun and relatively light. Mary Pickford has a lot of great movies that are perhaps not comedies, but definitely have comedic elements. Pollyanna might be a good choice at the moment. It's not as sappy as you think it should be. I recommend the book Pollyanna too. I believe that's in the public domain, so if you want to read that, that's probably on here somewhere as well. Also, I just want to mention one particular movie, which would be The Flapper. I'm mentioning this just because my intro and my little Patreon screen at the end, if people sometimes ask where that clip is from, it's from this movie. It's from Alice Thomas's The Flapper. I use clips from this film all the time too. If you watch this movie, you'll recognize some of the clips that I use as sort of stock footage. It's got some really great fashions, though. Now, if you're looking for something to actually do rather than just waste your time looking at stuff on the internet, there are a lot of books that have actual practical advice, so you could use these for inspiration for projects you might want to tackle if you're stuck inside or just bored. One such thing would be some of the yarn books. Here we have the Columbia Book of Yarns. I forget which edition this is. This one's from 1908. Yeah, they do have some later ones as well, and I think they have some earlier ones. These are full of knitting and crochet patterns. Let's go to the thumbnail view for a minute. So really fun if you have some yarn that you want to use up. These have some great historical patterns. And historical patterns tend to be a little more challenging than modern patterns. To me, that makes them more interesting. They're more fun to sort of figure out, and there's a little more investigative work. So if you're stuck inside and you want something sort of challenging and something to keep you engaged, I highly recommend knitting some historical patterns if you have the supplies. Oh, those are cute little slippers. I have to make a big version of those. So we have all kinds of different stitch patterns. You can maybe make a blanket if you have all kinds of scraps left over. Maybe use some of these different patterns here as inspiration. We also have outfits. And as I said, there's all kinds of different editions of that. Oh, the rainbow shawl. I've actually made the rainbow shawl. It doesn't look like that when it's done. It's actually a big rectangle. If you're a knitter, I'm sure you're not that bored, because we knitters are always able to keep ourselves entertained. Even if you don't knit anything from these, it's kind of fun just to look at all the different things that were available and all the different patterns that they had. Very, very fun. Oh, wow. Some of these slippers are really fun. I might have to make myself a new pair of slippers. These are... Oh, look at those. Bedroom shoes. Those are cute. Those are really cute. If you're not a knitter, but you are a sewer, there are all kinds of historical sewing books available as well. So here's ABC of Dress. This is a 1920s book, 1923. If we go to the overview here, you can see we have written stuff on sort of articles about what dresses to wear. Here's some fashion, just general fashion advice. So some of these sewing books are not necessarily exact patterns, but more just general advice, which can be quite interesting even if you're not into historical sewing, just as historical fashion in general. Color and texture. And here we go, the ABC of dressmaking. Now we're getting into the actual, like the stitches and the seams and some of the different finishing techniques. So as I said, even if you're not into actually recreating some of these stitches, it can be quite an interesting read just to get an idea of how things were done. Another good one would be Art and Dress. This one's definitely more fashion focused. This is another one from the 1920s. I think this is 1922. So it is sort of a sewing book, but you could definitely read this just from a fashion perspective. Very, very fun, this one. It's got some really great illustrations. And as I said, there are some older books as well. Here's a Victorian one. This is Home Dressmaking and the Art of Good Dressing. I don't know who comes up with these titles. But again, some of these have just general fashion advice, like color harmonies, how to pick what colors to go together, how to dress well as actual sewing advice. So, if you're looking for something to do, I highly recommend Handicraft for Handy Girls. This Friday's video is actually going to be a craft bit of this book. It's aimed at school children. I think it's perfectly suitable for adults and children alike. There are some that are definitely more juvenile crafts, but there's a lot of crafts that would be just as much fun and just as useful for adults. So we have a quick flip through here. So this book's from 1916. So some of it's divided seasonally. You can see here are some of the carpentry crafts. All kinds of different things you can make. Spool holders for your thread, key holders, that's quite fun. Some of these are more complicated than others, but a lot of these you can probably make with stuff you can find around your house. The one I'm going to be doing this Friday is actually making cornstarch jewelry, which I think is a little further along in the book. Partly that I picked this recipe originally because it sounded just interesting and it was voted on by my Patreons, but I'm specifically doing it right at the moment because I think it's a really great craft that you can do with stuff you already have around the house. So if you are self-isolating, then you should be able to do this without any need to go shopping. Most people have cornstarch, salt, and water in just like tablespoon quantities around their house. So anyway, this is a fun one. All kinds of different crafts you can do. There's the cornstarch jewelry right here. This is the cornstarch article. And if you're not exactly crafty, you can always get busy in the kitchen. This is practical vegetarian cookery, but if you're not a vegetarian, there are all kinds of historical cookbooks on archive.org. I think this is a highly underused resource. Historical recipes are so much fun. Here, I'm just going to scroll through the index so you can see some of the different recipes. What I like about historical cooking is a lot of times the recipes tend to use a lot less ingredients, or tend to be simpler, because people just didn't have the food available or the tools and equipment available that we do now. So at this time, where food shortages may be a problem because people are hoarding, which they really shouldn't do, these can be really great recipe inspiration. If you think, well, okay, I have very limited stuff in the cupboard, what can I make? These can be really interesting for recipe inspiration. So I've made a number of historical recipes in the past, and they're really fun. Sometimes they take a bit of experimentation. A lot of times you're going to have to wing part of it. They might not give, for example, cooking times, because back then every oven was different. You know, if you're working with a coal oven or a wood stove or something, cooking times and all those are going to be very dependent on your particular machine. So sometimes you just have to play it by ear, but that can be quite fun. And the last one would be a household hint booklet. I think right at the moment, now is a really great time to kind of take stock of your house, do some deep cleaning. You're stuck inside anyway, so why not declutter or have a clean, have a redecoration, sort of move stuff around a bit. And some of these old household hint books have some really interesting suggestions on how to clean things, or just general decor advice, things you can make for around the home. Oh, here's one, uses for an old bed sheet. So there's a whole bunch of these household hint books. This is 1001 Household Hints from 1910. A lot of this has sort of, now it's a little early to call it the make, do, and mend attitude, but that's just kind of the way stuff was back then, is that you were a lot more self-reliant. So in this time where, you know, you might not be able to get everything that you would normally get, I think some of these books might actually be quite useful in terms of using what you have to fulfill whatever needs that you're feeling, or to just keep yourself occupied, things to do. The last thing I want to mention is actually not from archive.org, and this is Radio Dismuke. The music of the 1920s and 30s is very uplifting. Even music from especially music from the Great Depression, tended to be very, very happy and positive and upbeat, and I think that was intentional. I always feel great after listening to this music. This music really lifts my mood. So I'm going to recommend Radio Dismuke. They play sounds of the 1920s and 30s 24 hours a day. The only commercials that they tend to have are actual historical commercials, which are actually really fun to listen to. But most of it's just music. I play it on an absolute loop while I'm sewing or working on, you know, tidying my room or something like that. So, as I said before, Friday's video will be a regular tutorial video. I hope everyone is doing okay, and I will see you guys next time. Bye! This video is made possible through the generous support of my Patreon members. Thank you.